Good.
All right, welcome everybody. Thanks for taking the time to attend today's meeting. I know it was a bit organized on short notice. I really appreciate everyone's effort to be here. Not a super long agenda today, so hopefully we can move quickly through our business. This does represent the first meeting of the year for the MMAC committee. However, the year has certainly been active with respect to issues in business surrounding Atlantic Menhaden. The first item I have on the agenda is approval of the minutes. Those were distributed a while back, a few days ago. Hopefully you all have had a chance to review them. Any corrections or changes or discussion points before I call for a motion to approve? Hearing none, do I have a motion to approve the minutes from last meeting, November 28th, 2022?
So moved.
Second.
Anyone opposed? Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Ken. Consensus there. New business is essentially the main objective of the meeting here. As I'm sure you all are aware, and I'll give a little more background. Coming out of the legislation was a bill charging VIMS to develop some thoughts and plans about possible Menhaden research objectives. I have a short PowerPoint prepared to go over that. So really what we're trying to do here is just give you an update as to where we are. There's not a lot of time, but we're certainly would welcome any comments or thoughts and feedback that you might have to share. I think the way this works is I become presenter.
Yeah, I did pass it to you. So now on the WebEx screen, you should see a share content.
Yeah, which one do I want to share? Not that one, not that one. That one, I think. Everybody see the PowerPoint?
Yep, we can see it.
Is it full screen or do I need to do that?
No, it's just the PowerPoint itself.
Is that better?
Now it's full screen.
Okay, thanks everyone. So like I said, just a few slides here to sort of update you as to where things are. As you all know, the last General Assembly legislative session this past winter spring was active regarding Menhaden. Lots of discussion, lots of back and forth, at least between me, VIMS, and Senator Lewis. Senator Lewis introduced the bill, Senate Bill 1388, in early January. And the language associated with the bill at the time basically indicated VIMS will study, and I put everything here because it had a long list of topics ranging from ecology, biology, fundamental things, movement, predation impacts, bioeconomics, analysis of fisheries data. It had everything, tagging in there. And the feedback we gave to Senator Lewis was that it was a bit too much. Ideas on how to proceed with some of those things hadn't even been worked out amongst the technical people associated with the assessment or anyone else in the region regarding the academic or research community. Nevertheless, he pushed forward. There was a substitute bill introduced on February 3rd, and it really just took the original bill with some modified language regarding data and access to data. Another amendment was made on February 6th. And then between February 6th and 14th, we really were able to make some progress in terms of tempering expectations. And the bill was overhauled to what it presently is. And it was more of a VIMS will develop a research plan. So, here we're going to kind of work through where we are in that process. If you haven't ever seen it, here's the language of the bill verbatim. I've just highlighted here that VIMS will develop plans for studying the ecology, fisheries impacts, and economic importance of Menhaden populations in the waters of the Commonwealth. There's some sub-bullets identifying relevant stakeholders for participation, methodologies, timelines, costs, and possible collaborating collaborators on the research itself. And we're asked to report back. It says September 1st, but we do have an extension to October 1st, so it really will be submitted this week. If you haven't saw this, I saw this as an opportunity to bring together folks from different backgrounds, a diverse group of folks with differing views on Menhaden and the issues that have been brought forth over the last several years. And so with the help of Shanna, she functioned really as a co-chair of this, and I really appreciate her contributions. We put together a meeting of stakeholders or representatives of different groups. It was held for about a day and a half, August 8th and 9th at William & Mary. 20 attendees representing all sectors of the Menhaden stakeholder group. We engaged a professional facilitator to guide us through the meeting agenda from the Institute for Engagement and Negotiation at UVA. She was fabulous. Recommendations that came out of the meeting were based on consensus, and the themes we took straight from the language of the bill, and those three themes were ecology, fishery impacts, and economic importance. I found, and others were at the meeting, you can contribute your thoughts if you wish, but I found the meeting to be collegial and productive. I thought it went really well overall, and we came out with some good ideas. I'll walk you through those ideas. And as you might expect, many of them focused on Chesapeake Bay specifically and breaking the bay away from the coastwide area. And so under the ecology theme, I don't remember exactly how many different research topics were put forward, but we decided that as a group, we would work through and come to a consensus on the top three. And so these represent the top three from each of the areas in order of their ranking. And so the first is estimate the seasonal abundance of Atlantic menhaden in the bay. Methodologies, just loosely here, this may involve some analysis of commercial data, but we recognize the commercial data is insufficient to characterize abundance in the entire bay. So there will have to be some new survey methods, some development there, perhaps aerial, perhaps hydroacoustic echo sounder type stuff. And so it's being viewed as a combined effort with analysis of extant data and some development of new methodologies for surveying. Ranking second was movement between the coast and the bay. There was this historic tagging study done in the 1960s. Over 1 million fish were tagged with ferromagnetic tags, and all of the reduction facilities along the coast were equipped with the magnets to detect recoveries. A study like that is arguably infeasible nowadays, given the contraction of the industry and just the difficulty of getting enough animals to actually get decent recovery rates, given the volume of landings from the fisheries. So I've been doing a lot of research on the hydroacoustic tag options. There are some very, very small ones that are being used for studying juvenile fishes, particularly juvenile smolt salmon. And so to be determined, but the first go might be a proof of concept with some hydroacoustic tagging for movement rates between the bay and the coast. And then third was predation impacts. And so this would certainly require some field work where we enhance the predator sampling, not only the predators, but the times of year and the locations where samples come from to get a more complete estimation of consumption. On the fisheries impacts, the rankings came out as you see here. Number one, analyze spatiotemporal patterns in commercial fishing effort. The thinking here is perhaps there's some information contained in fishing and commercial fishing effort that might provide insight on the availability and possible estuarine versus coastal utilization of Atlantic menhaden. It would also be interesting to perhaps look at distributional shifts in where fishing was occurring, as obviously the fleets go where the fish are. And so the thought here was that the commercial data may have some insight as to potential changes in distribution of Atlantic menhaden. Localized depletion, this concept, this nebulous idea in some respects was discussed heavily, and it ranked number 2 here. And the reality is we can't begin to evaluate it in earnest basically have an understanding of abundance in the bay and movements between the bay and the coast, alternatively stated as residence time in the estuary. So in order to legitimately take a crack at this one, we really need to synthesize the results of the ecology section. And then third was quantifying changes in the recreational fisheries. There's been a lot of recreational fishing over the years, and participation in the fishery has changed over time. Effort has changed over time. Harvest, target species have changed over time. And so the thought here is that the demographic characteristics of the recreational fisheries may have also some insight into changes in Atlantic menhaden abundance or availability. And then third was economic importance. Although 1 and 2 ranked as they are in the screen, the reality is you'd have to do item 2 before you do item 1. But the first one was assess the economic impacts of management decisions on menhaden fisheries and related industries. It's recognized that the products coming from the commercial fisheries go to places in Virginia, but they also go to places throughout the U.S. and internationally. And management actions typically are made with only a biological concept in mind, and there's very little consideration given to cascading effects to primary, secondary, and tertiary industries associated with the fisheries. So first and foremost was to try to assess the impacts economically on alternative management decisions. So in my mind, this represents sort of a bioeconomic MSC type approach. But in order to do that, we would have to achieve number 2, which is basically assess the economic impacts of management decisions. So conduct or develop an economic impact model for the commercial sectors and some non-market valuation for the recreational sector. So really assessing trade-offs in the management enterprise would require having the economic impact model in hand. So those are very much linked. And the third was sort of quantify the impact of essentially establishing the bay as a marine protected area from commercial menhaden fishing, i.e. move commercial menhaden fishing out to the coast and leave the bay as is. Of course, this would have significant consequences economically, but it also would have some consequences to the stock itself. Most notably, older, bigger fish are on the coast. So if harvest is increased on those fish, then we actually are removing a larger reproductive potential from the population. So characterizing that impact would be important. And so the third ranking research area was to evaluate this trade-off between where landings are coming from between the bay and the coast and apportioning them across the 2 areas. And certainly that would require simulation analysis. All 3 of these, or the first one and the third one, would certainly be a large-scale simulation study. In case you're wondering who attended, here's the list of participants. The only sector only person we weren't able to get in attendance was from the Maryland. Help me, Shannon. Is it Maryland CCA?
CCA, yes.
Yeah, Mr. Sikorsky. But otherwise, everyone we reached out to was able to attend and contribute. So it really was a productive meeting. Shanna, thanks so much for all of your efforts and co-leading this workshop. Christina for facilitating. Mark and Cecilia for logistics and organization. Cecilia was fabulous in terms of setting up hotels and meeting rooms and online virtual options for a few attendees. VIM's administration, since the cost of the workshop was paid for by VIM, so we appreciate that. And Jim and Caroline for acting as rapporteurs and capturing fabulous notes during the entire day and a half. So with that, I'll take questions. Questions first, and then or suggestions. I can tell you the report itself is not going to be lengthy. It's not going to be overly technical. It's rather high level, and it basically focuses on those 9 items that I've just presented to you. So if you have questions about the report, happy to answer those. But essentially, you've seen now the core of it. So I will exit mode. I'll leave my screen here in case somebody wants to see a slide, but happy to take questions. I can't really
Okay.
see hands raised, Shanna, so
Yeah, I can help you out. So it looks like
AJ, oh, actually I got it. AJ, I see his hand raised.
okay, we can start. Yeah, we can start. Okay.
AJ first, then Chris Moore.
Thanks, Rob, and appreciate the the information and then everybody that participated. I did have a question about localized depletion, that bullet point.
Yep.
If maybe you can go back to, yeah, so number 2 under the fishery impacts. And I may be thinking of something else, but was there ever a study done? It might have been an informal study, but on localized depletion and those impacts. Maybe I'm thinking of something else.
You're probably thinking back in the, I'm going to get the years wrong, 2009-ish. NOAA Chesapeake Bay Office coordinated some efforts to, without collecting new data, necessarily see if there was a way to assess this question, and actually commissioned an external peer review of the available information we had and whether it was sufficient to address this question. And the answer was basically no. The information we had at the time wasn't sufficient to address it. We provided stuff that, you know, aided our understanding of Atlantic menhaden biology and ecology and aided our understanding of predator-prey interactions. But it was noted, you know, what is the working definition of a localized depletion? It's a difficult thing to define in the first place. ASMFC has since articulated their definition of it. But what time scale constitutes localized depletion? What spatial scale? These are all open questions. We did not get into these in the workshop, but I think, you know, the idea of trying to understand whether fishery removals are a small or large fraction of Atlantic menhaden in the bay is the essence of the research objective. So keeping it rather high level and a bit nebulous, I don't mean to be vague, but that's kind of where we were within the workshop.
Yeah, no, I get it. That makes sense. I appreciate it.
Sure. Thanks, AJ. Chris?
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. Really helpful. A couple of things real quick. One thing I was kind of surprised it didn't pop up as a number, but maybe it does underneath one of the ones was effects of climate change on the species. Is that something that's going to be looked at as part of this?
Yeah, I probably didn't do a very good job. A lot of these had like a sub bullet here where we would say, and link results to environmental variables. So in the case where we're going back in time and we have extant data and we're developing estimates of new quantities, a natural progression of that work would be to link it to environmental drivers that occurred over that time scale. So there is ongoing work. I'm collaborating with a student at Cornell who's looking at developing a species distribution model and coupling that with downscaled climate models. So there is some ongoing work that maybe, you know, will likely be happening outside of this effort, should any of this even come to fruition. So I'm kind of giving you a long answer, Chris, but the idea of linking to the environment is there. It wasn't articulated as directly as you just did, but I think the concept is being captured.
Great, thank you. And one other thing, and you kind of hit on this a little bit with other studies, but is the report going to maybe do like a bibliography or something similar of either other studies that are ongoing or that may be happening during the time frame of this work? Like you said, I think you referenced one study already. I know 2 or 3 others that are either funded or currently seeking funding that may be looking at menhaden as one of a set of multiple species. But are those type of efforts going to be referenced in the study in some way, shape, or in the report in some way, shape, or form?
At the moment, no. I'm not aware of all of them, honestly. I wrote this primarily with the idea that legislators are reading it, and the attention span is limited, and the ability to digest technical information is limited. So it reads, in my opinion, rather straightforward and simple. It's not a scientific document by any means. So certainly keeping track of ongoing work is necessary. Perhaps Shannon and I can work on developing, that bibliography for our committee here and just for general consumption of research that's being considered. I'll have to think about that a little bit.
Thank you.
I should have said that this is just a roadmap that we will provide the respective chairs of the subcommittees on natural resources from the Senate and the House, as well as Secretary of Natural Resources. Where it goes from there is out of our hands and out of our reach. The governor is preparing his biennium budget, so it's his opportunity to really shape the future of Virginia. And of course, the General Assembly will work off of that when they come back to session next winter. Whether any of this gets traction or not is beyond my ability to speculate or predict. Any other questions, Chris, or comments?
Well, yeah, I think you put a softball up there, I guess. With that, based on what you all have pulled together thus far, do you have an estimate of, say, annual dollars needed and then a time frame? If a legislator were to ask you, hey, what is our need per year over how many years? What would your estimate be at this point based on what you've put forth?
We have very rough round numbers associated with each of the 9 objectives, some of which are linked together and can be combined because it's personnel costs, for example, on the data analysis side. And of course, some of the money might need to be allocated more so in the front end to get the program up and running, and less so in the back end. But we're blocking out 3 years. And we've got sort of teams of people identified should any one of these come forward. The 3 years is nothing magical other than we need some time to do this because a lot of these things are really hard, and we don't want it to be so long that General Assembly members find it just unpalatable because it takes a decade or something crazy like that. I know for survey work and things like that, 3 years doesn't do you much, but if we could show proof of concept and it actually might work, then perhaps there's other ways to fund it more long term. But to answer your question, we're proposing 2 to 3 years depending on the item, and we will break down the costs by year. That's one of the last things on the list before this goes to Richmond.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Craig.
Yes, I had a question on the economic impact or importance. On number 3, you said, I guess the way I read that is if they're not allowed, no one's allowed to take Menhaden from the Bay, and then you said that would have a huge economic impact. And so I was wondering what that economic impact might be, in your opinion.
Well, Chan, I can't remember if this was restricted to the reduction fishery or all fishing, but the bait folks in Chesapeake Bay area region strictly operate in the Bay, so there's potential that their businesses are at risk. With the reduction fleet, Monty's on the line. He can tell you better than me, but that would change their operating costs. It would change their number of fishing days, given weather impacts. It would change a lot of their business model. So from the economic side, I was referring to those kinds of changes. On the biology side, it would shift the harvest to a different age portion of the stock. And so there would be biological and ecological impacts there. So I think coupling those together would be informative. Monty, if there's more you want to add, feel free.
No, I think, what we talked about at the workshop was that, the argument we've made all along is that, volumetric businesses that have a very high overhead fixed costs like we do when you've got, large boats and a large plant, you really, your revenue stream is that last, 20 or so % is where you actually, make your money. And if you cut out a third of the harvest, where does that leave you? Which is what essentially the Bay harvest is, a little less than a third. And if you don't get the weather to make that up in the ocean, then you're no longer a viable business. So that's the impact.
I got you. Has anybody looked at the potential impact of the return of game fishing and all that to the bay, and like the recreational angler impact monetarily or economically?
I'm not aware. Some of the previous Menhaden economic impact assessments have components of those studies that provide some insight into the recreational economic impacts for the region. I don't know of anything that's ongoing at the moment, though, or has been done in the last few years. Happy to stand corrected. But I guess what you're getting at is the concept of the economic benefit greater from the recreational sector than the commercial sector. Yeah, I don't know. That'd be
Well, I mean, they're all factors that come into play, right? That's all.
Yeah.
It's mentioned, because I remember, back from, I don't know, 2002 to 2012ish or so, we were the striped bass capital of the world, and there was millions upon millions of dollars of impact that came in from out of state and just recreational fishing. So that's
Yeah.
I just think that's noteworthy. Is all.
Yeah, I think a more direct way to get that back might be to manage the fishery differently, and that's happening. So hopefully we'll see some response. Any other questions or comments, Craig?
No, that's all. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Shanna.
Yeah, I just had a couple of comments to Craig's questions. First of all, I was just looking into some of the economic analyses for some work that I'm doing for our Office of Regulatory Management. In 2020, the Menhaden fishery generated $57 million for Virginia. So that's just like one rough estimate, at least, that I can give you. That's coming from the NOAA economic report that's released yearly. It's a couple of years behind always, because it takes some time to gather that data, obviously. The second thing is, Rob, you're completely right. There hasn't been anything kind of stating the economic, I guess, value of one Menhaden to the fishery versus one Menhaden, say, to a predator fish that's caught recreationally. I don't think anyone's frankly ever going to be able to tell us that. ASMFC has done a couple of studies that look at this from more of a sociological perspective, not economic. So there is some information as to trade-offs, as to how perceptions would be from various sectors, various persons, companies, etc. So some of that information is out there, Craig, but it's not, we really can't do evaluation down to that level of granularity.
Yeah, great comments. Thank you.
So hey, can I ask her what you said? 57 million. Like how did where did that 57 million go? Like what was it used for? You said 57 million was brought into the state. Like how did the state use it? Like I don't understand what you're saying exactly there.
Well, I'm not going to be able to like specifically elucidate how the state works with it, but that's the economic impacts of the fishery, and that is contained within the NOAA economic report that's released every year. They will also have evaluations for the recreational fishery for Virginia as well. I just happen to know that number off the top of my head because I was working with it today.
Great, thanks. Ken. Ken, maybe you're on mute if you're trying to speak.
Okay, I got it. Sorry. Thank you.
Yep, you're good.
It sounds to me like although there is a significant economic value to the recreational fishery, in Chesapeake Bay, and particularly for striped bass, and although it's been diminishing, that in this study, we're not going to be able to say much about that because you don't have or won't be able to obtain data that specifically relates to Menhaden vis-a-vis the recreational fishery and striped bass in particular. Am I understand this correctly?
From an economic perspective, or a stock
Yes.
rebuilding, or stock maintaining stock sizes, or things like questions like that.
Well, specifically the economic, that's what we're talking about here, the economic value.
Yeah. I mean, the three studies in front of you certainly won't get at that. And I'm trying to recollect if that was brought up during the workshop at all. I don't recall it being framed in the way you just did, Ken. I mean, there were certainly discussions about the trade-offs of economic benefit between the commercial and recreational sectors, but putting a value on Menhaden and tracing where it goes recreationally or commercially was not something that was discussed at length. Shannon, do you recall?
So I think we only had Andrew for the one day, so it wasn't discussed at length, but we have kind of discussed this in the context of a couple of RFPs that I've worked on previously when I was working at ASNFC. Again, we can't get to that level of granularity. It would really depend on a billion factors that I don't know that we would be able to ever quantify. You'd have to figure out exactly how many Menhaden a striped bass eats over the course of its lifetime, whether or not that striped bass lives to survival, whether or not that striped bass is caught, how that works into, the recreational sector. What happens if that one Menhaden was caught by a reduction boat or a bait boat? How much is it valued at then? I just don't see anyone being able to provide that level of granularity. And it's definitely something the ASNFC has asked for. And I think that if we had the answer to that question, it would sure make management a whole lot easier, or, we'd all know a little bit more about the economics of the fisheries, but that's.
Right. Thank you, Shannon, for that. I appreciate that. But it occurs to me that we run the risk of significantly undervaluing the value of that fishery vis-a-vis the Menhaden population in this study, or neglecting it altogether because you lack that granularity and that level of data.
Well, I don't know that it would be neglected altogether, but I mean, Ken, one thing I will say that I've brought to this committee quite a few times is if we shut down the entire Menhaden fishery across the whole coast, currently our ecological models show that striped bass would not be able to recover it without some sort of change to fishing pressure.
Mm-hmm.
So again, we really can't look at things at that level of granularity to be able to figure out what the importance of one Menhaden is to one of the many species, and what the importance of one Menhaden is passing through the bait company to another, market on the Atlantic or Gulf Coast or even overseas.
Thank you, Shannon.
Rob, I have one more question.
Sure, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, Ken.
How will VIMS or will VIMS be able to inform us of the progress that it's making on these various factors it's evaluating? It will be evaluating.
Well, first and foremost, the General Assembly or the governor or both have to
Sure.
Fund some of it.
Sure.
So, if something gets funded, in the report, we've identified agencies that we feel would be best positioned to conduct the work effectively. And that's not VIMS exclusively. There's each one of these items has collaborators and stakeholder engagement. We haven't thought about how to keep folks up to speed on what's happening, I suppose this is one venue, providing, written updates to the VMRC, possibly to Richmond as well, to ASMFC. I imagine all of those outlets there'll be an expectation of communicating and working with folks, on the technical committee and within VMRC. So off the top of my head, those are the usual outlets, and that's what I would expect. Going to fishing clubs and talking about it too could be a possibility. I don't know. Do you have any suggestions or ideas?
Do I?
Yeah, I mean, is there a certain expectation that you were thinking about?
No, but I certainly hope that what you just laid out there is what actually does follow. It would be a shame to be sort of in the dark here for an unknown period of time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, if something gets funded and VIMS is involved, it'll likely be me in some form or another, and I have no interest in keeping it quiet. So certainly we'll make people aware of what's happening.
All right, thank you, Rob.
Sure. Let's see, Monty.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Well, at the workshop, there was a contingent of Maryland DNR there, and of course they were very interested in this, but it was also brought up that in order to do this holistically, that there would need to be, some data, and I don't know that details were discussed, that Maryland contributed. And I think the comment by maybe Dr. Wilberg or someone was that Maryland simply didn't have this data. How is Virginia's efforts here going to glean that data from Maryland?
Is that a question to me?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you, Shanna, anyone. I mean, because it was discussed that to do this properly, that data from the upper portion of the bay was going to be needed. And while the Virginia General Assembly can deal with what they want to deal with, how dependent on Maryland is this?
Yeah, I think it's fundamental that these questions be asked at a Baywide level. And so under item number 1, which by the way is by far the most expensive item on the list, is a hybrid of analyses of commercial data, so landings information, effort, that sort of thing, which is plentiful if available for Virginia, but absent from Maryland. And that's where I think the new survey methods would have to supplement. And so new field work would have to occur to cover the Maryland portion. There'd have to be ground truthing. There'd have to be a lot of study design to pull this off. So it's a huge ask. It's a huge lift. And so I think of it more as a proof of concept at this point. But the commercial data are probably informative at some level. So I think, we can make progress on that front. And then we can bring along some sort of alternative survey methodology that's promising, then the two combined, I think would get us in a better position. But the other way of saying it is extant data alone isn't going to answer the question adequately.
Thanks. That's what I remember at the meeting too. Thanks.
Any other questions or comments? Chris.
Sorry, hope it's okay if I ask a few more. Rob, with this work, is the report going to identify, or is everything in this report going to be studies that would be done just by VIMS, or are there other research institutions or other agencies that may be doing some of this work?
It's a wide range of agencies. VIMS is probably is for each of the 9 items. We have identified agencies that we feel have the capability and expertise to do the work, and it's not exclusively VIMS by any means. VIMS is named in several of them for many reasons. Ongoing work that we've got here, data in hand that we have here, those sort of reasons. Because a lot of these are extensions of things that we've done. But by no means is it exclusively VIMS. It'll be a collaborative effort across several teams of people.
Great, thank you. And then I noticed on I think it was the very first slide, under estimate seasonal abundance, there was a sub-bullet there about new survey methods.
Yeah.
Is the possibility there to use, maybe at least in some way, shape, or form, the survey work that Mike Wilberg did? I know he was at the stakeholder meeting. Or is the thinking that you would probably develop a completely new aerial survey method?
No, that's what I was referring to with Monty's question. If aerial was the way to go, and it was discussed, at the workshop, the aerial works great for schools that are at the surface, but cannot see schools at depth. Nevertheless, I think Mike Wilberg's study design would be the first place we would go in terms of survey design. Fitting, whatever technology we feel is most promising into that survey design would take some thinking, but we're not going to reinvent the wheel. Mike did a nice job with a nice simulation study that goes with that design to show different levels of estimation and precision. So by all means, I think we would start there.
Yeah. And then one last question. In terms of predator sampling and consumption estimation, there's a lot of tools out there now that are new and don't necessarily require people digging through stomachs, like eDNA. Is that something that is being considered to help study the studies with that particular bullet?
Yeah, I'll say in general, yes. And there's folks here at VIMS that are exploring that pretty heavily with slightly different applications, but nevertheless, it's eDNA work. My personal opinion is it's not mature enough to get at the detailed question we have here, and that is consumption of Menhaden. But there are other molecular techniques, and there are other things beyond just traditional stomach contents that could be incorporated. And yeah, we're certainly thinking of those, but a lot of what would have to happen here is some additional sampling, boats on the water, fish in hand, stomach analyses of predators at different times at different places. There are just big holes in our diet database and our understanding of impacts, most notably in the wintertime.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Sure. How are we doing? Anybody else have any more thoughts or questions? Anyone else? I think I could probably stop sharing now, right? See the full list of folks.
Hey, Rob, will your presentation be made available by email to the committee?
It can be, but I'm going to wait until after we submit the report, if that's okay.
Yep, got it. Thank you.
Because I'm working on the thing every day this week, so it's changing a little bit here and there. I don't want to have
Yeah, I'm sure. All right, thank you.
mixed messaging going on. Okay, appreciate the comments. Good discussion. Thanks very much. If something comes to mind following the meeting today, feel free to email me. Happy to answer more questions or take comments under advisement. Remarkably, we're on schedule here. The makers of the agenda are clairvoyant in terms of time allocation. So I think we'll close the new business and open up other business. Anyone have other business to bring forward?
I have a couple of things, Rob.
Okay.
So just briefly, I did want to mention to the committee that the MRC is working through a new petition process. Petitions have previously not gone to the MRC in this way, but with the governor's executive order 19, we are now going through a petition process that is in code. I just wanted to bring the attention of this committee to that petition process so that they are aware. We will continue to keep folks updated on that petition process. We have closed the public comment period per code. From there, we have 90 days to bring this in front of the commission. So be on the lookout for our upcoming commission meetings, as the commission will hear that petition and then make a determination moving forward on if they would like to pursue rulemaking or not. That decision is up to them. And I can take any questions from the committee on that if people have questions about process. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, thanks for that update, Shanna. So in terms of the process there, is that basically mean like a normal fisheries management agenda item? There'll be a background, a staff recommendation, and then the commission votes whether to move forward or not. Is that how you envision the process, or is that how it has to work based on legislation?
So generally, yes, Chris. I think it'll move forward similarly. We don't have there's nothing in code that adheres us to something super specific as to how the process goes at the commission level. I think that what will happen is I'm going to plan on giving the commission an update of the petition process, as again, they haven't seen it before, what the stipulations are regarding code, to make sure that we are being lawful. And then we'll go through the petition itself, comments, etc. And at that time, staff will provide some thoughts and or factual information on the petition topic. From there, I think we'll obviously be opening for public comment, and then the commission will make a determination on how they'd like to pursue rulemaking. There's no time limit kind of on the rulemaking side of things. So depending on how, if they want to move forward, what they'd want to move forward, it may take some time, obviously, to craft language, etc. But that's how the process in essence works.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, I don't see any other questions. The other thing that I just wanted to bring up briefly is I was asked by Mr. Lilly to please remind the committee that I had forwarded some comments and attachments from him. So he just wanted to remind you that that is in your inbox, just so you are aware. The last thing that I have under other business is we have Ruth from DWR, I believe, still on. Summers will be able to unmute her, but Ruth is coming to let us know about a marine mammal conservation planning workshop to see if any of the committee members would be interested in attending. So with that, I will turn it over to Summers, who can unmute Ruth.
Yes. Okay, Ruth. So I'm going to request that you unmute. You should be able to do so. Okay, you're unmuted.
Thank you. Thank you, Shanna. Yeah, as Shanna said, my name is Ruth Betcher, and I'm with the Department of Wildlife Resources, and I'm a coastal biologist for the agency. And I really appreciate the opportunity to extend an invite to a 2-day workshop, a marine mammal conservation planning workshop that's going to be held at the Brock Environmental Center in Virginia Beach. The dates are October 31st through November 1st. So again, a 2-day workshop. A rough time frame is, 9 to 5, something like that. But the goal of the workshop is to obtain input from stakeholders for the Virginia Marine Mammal Conservation Plan that DWR is in the process of preparing. And this plan is going to be part of a larger ocean plan that DEQ Coastal Zone Management Program is developing that that effort was put on hold for a little while and is now back on the table. And just to give you some background information about the workshop, the objectives are to provide stakeholders background information on the ecology and distribution of marine mammals in Virginia, as well as protections that are currently afforded to marine mammals, identify risks and challenges that affect marine mammals in state waters, identify actions that can be taken to conserve marine mammals in our state, and encourage partnerships and collaborations among the stakeholders and agencies that support marine mammal conservation in Virginia. So we're still trying to figure out, the structure of the workshop, but basically it's going to consist of a series of presentations on the first day that'll provide the necessary background to attendees for breakout groups that will be convening mostly on the second day. And we haven't really fully developed the topics of the breakout groups, but generally speaking, so far it includes vessel strikes, offshore wind energy impacts, dredging, and fishery interactions. So yeah, we would really like to have a representative from the Menhaden fishery at this workshop that can, first of all, listen in on our discussions, provide input from industry perspective, and most importantly, make sure that, the Menhaden fishery is part of this planning process and will be included in any future discussions once the plan is completed and action items start getting implemented. So I hope that we will have some representation from the Menhaden fishery at this workshop. And what I can do is I will put in the chat my email address if you are interested in attending, and I will be sure to send out an invitation for you. And with that, I would be happy to take any questions about that.
Thank you, Ruth. That was excellent description. Really appreciate the update. Any questions for Ruth or comments? Not seeing any. I think Ruth has placed her email in the chat box. Be sure to jot that down if something comes up. I'm speaking for Ruth, but I'm sure you could email her with questions and follow up on regarding the workshop in October. All right. Shanna, any other new business or other business?
That is all of the other business that I have currently.
Any other business topics from other members of the committee? I didn't have anything since the other business that's consumed my time has been the SB 1388. Okay, sounds good. Public comment. Anyone from the public wish to make a comment?
Yep, we have one person in line. They don't have a name listed.
Okay.
It looks to be a phone number, but it's one digit longer than a phone number, but I will request to unmute them. It is 252-543-47960. So they've been requested to unmute.
Okay, maybe when they unmute, they can state their name and affiliation.
Yes, that'd be great.
Is it Brent Hussinger?
No, so they're also in line. This person, so if I request to unmute you, my understanding is you then have to unmute yourself as well. So if that person would like to speak this number, you're gonna have to also unclick or click the unmute button. 252-543.
To help, the unmute button is in the bottom of your screen in the middle.
Why don't we
Let's move to Brent.
move to Brent and give that individual time to unmute. If that's not possible, then I would suggest putting the question or comment in the chat box for everyone to digest, if that's possible. So consider that as an option. Brent.
Yes, hold on, let me go to him. So Brent, you have been requested to unmute. So now there you go.
Yep.
Hello, my name is Brent Hunsinger. I'm with Friends of the Rappahannock. I just had a question regarding if Omega Protein has agreed to provide their catch data to help further inform the study going forward. Thank you.
Is that directed to me, Brent, or just the committee in general?
It was directed to, I guess, yes, sir, to you or anyone on the committee. Just as just a question if they have agreed to help provide catch data just so we know kind of what they're catching and where over time to help study historically.
Yeah, I would say in a very general kind of high level conceptual idea, the answer is yes. But those data, of course, are confidential, and a great amount of details would need to be worked out in terms of establishing the guardrails and guidelines and ways in which the data would be shared and the ways in which they would be displayed. So those details have not been discussed in earnest, but I would say industry has given indications of interest in having those conversations and coming to something that's mutually acceptable for both sides. Is that good? I guess the person on the 252 number has unmuted. Is that correct?
Yep, I see that they're unmuted, so you can speak, Tom.
Yeah, this is Tom Lilly. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Committee and Dr. Latour, I wanted to remind you that the Virginia law section 28203 and section 102 provides that fishery management plans are to be construed in favor of the Commonwealth, meaning the people, and to favor preferences is given to the recreational and food fishermen. The factory fishing is not mentioned in the preferences. Therefore, I suggest to you that under Virginia law, the interests of the factory fishing should be subordinated to the interests of the recreational and food fishing, including charter fishing. And as you know from my handout, that charter fishing for striped bass in Maryland and Virginia has really been collapsing for many years. And in Summers Cove, for example, it has totally been extinguished. This is one of, as you guys know, this is one of our bay's great traditions and part of our culture that has been extinguished. So, Dr. Latour, I believe the Virginia law requires that your recommendations be made in a way that favors the interests of the recreational, charter, and food fishing. I hope you'll take a look at that section. Quickly, I'd like to speak to the issue that was raised of the lack of a link between Menhaden and recreational fishing. And Dr. Latour, also, as to your question that we need to possibly investigate the causal connection between the great lack of menhaden in Chesapeake Bay and what's happened to striped bass. I think you will agree with me, Shannon and Dr. Latour, that the Commission's ERP definitions very clearly state, and don't forget that the ERPs are based on the relationship between menhaden and striped bass, their connection. And the ERPs are very definitions are very clear, I believe, that striped bass are the most sensitive species to the menhaden harvest. In other words, when we see a situation like we have now, where the striped bass are in such terrible trouble in Maryland, their young of the year production the last 4 years has been the worst in history. And this is why Maryland and Chesapeake Bay have lost their position to New Jersey and New York as the great place to go striped bass fishing, as was mentioned. But anyway, because striped bass are in reproductive failure, Dr. Latour, under the ERP definitions, this defines the cause, and the cause is menhaden overharvesting, pure and simple. And we add to this the
Mr. Lilly, I forgot to mention,
yes.
it's about a three-minute window for your comments. So just, try to keep that in mind. Maybe wrap it up, please.
Okay. And the failure of the striped bass, the osprey reproduction, in the article I cited, which you co-authored, Dr. Latour, is that when ospreys are in trouble, that means that striped bass are usually also in trouble. They are partners in demise due to overharvesting of menhaden. So I really question whether it's necessary to go back and repeat all this work that was done by the commission 10 years ago. And diet studies in the bay are going to prove nothing because there's practically no menhaden in the bay for them to eat. We know that when menhaden were here, menhaden comprised about 90% of the diet of large striped bass. And I think if you're going to do a diet study,
Tom, you're well over your time.
Okay, thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments from the public?
Yep, we have one more person, Jacqueline Higgins, so I will request her to unmute.
Great, thank you.
And I'm with the Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership, and I have a question for Rob. Last week, there was a presentation about a study that you're a part of to develop a spatial modeling framework for striped bass to estimate abundance and mortality rates. I was wondering if you could maybe just give a high-level kind of overview of that spatial modeling in the bay and whether or not this study related to menhaden is going to include any spatial modeling, or if there's any spatial models being developed currently that we can use to kind of supplement this study. Thanks.
Thanks. Good questions. The work that I'm involved in regarding the striped bass spatial modeling is really in conjunction and led by Mike Wilberg at Chesapeake Biological Lab. He has a graduate student who is nearly completing the final base model, which reflects a spatial structure of, in simple terms, a box for Chesapeake Bay and a box for the coast. And we are trying to, model the population dynamics in the bay, estimate abundance and survival in the bay, as well as do the same for striped bass on the coast. It's a short time step, 6 months. Most models are a time step of a year. And we were fortunate enough that striped bass have a really rich tagging data set. That's been a coastwide tagging program that's been ongoing since the 1980s. And one of my students tackled analysis of those data applied a multi-state market capture model to look at the occupancy probabilities of striped bass originating from Chesapeake Bay, Delaware Bay, and Hudson River, and we're able to put together some exchange and movement rates that are informing the spatial model. That analysis is done. The spatial model is coming to close, so we should be close to wrapping that up. And we're also doing the same for spot. We're not that far along, but the same framework, generally speaking, will be applied to spot. And item number 1 here, I know I'm not showing my screen anymore, but item number 1 under the ecology section of the research objectives would undoubtedly require developing a spatial model similar to the one for striped bass and spot. I mean, there would have to be some tailoring because of the uniquenesses of the data in the Menhaden biology, but conceptually speaking, it would be a spatial model that separates the bay from the coast. Does that address your question?
Yeah, thanks for that. I guess in conjunction with that, is there any work going on from the greater Atlantic area or from ASMFC in order to kind of supplement this work?
Regarding Chesapeake Bay centric questions?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm just asking, is this, going to be a part of considerations at the ASMFC, or is there other work,
I thought you were asking
looking at the Delaware Bay specifically or other areas to look at spatial considerations?
Yeah, my bad. I thought you were asking if there's ongoing research involving spatial questions, and the answer to that would be, I think, no. But yes, similar to what I think Ken asked earlier, if some of this were to actually happen, especially estimating abundance in the bay, we would undoubtedly partner with ASMSC, the technical committee, VMRC, and other NOAA. NOAA Beaufort would be heavily involved. So it would be a shared partnership, and anything that we would develop would be in concert with their activities, so it's complementary.
Thanks.
Dan, just hang on. I want to get through public, and then we can circle back to you. Anyone else? Anyone else?
I don't see anybody else with their hand raised in the public.
Okay. Great. Thanks so much. Dan, your hand went down. Did you want to make a comment or ask a question?
Yeah, Rob, I appreciate it. This is back to Dr. Lilly's letter or Mr. Lilly's letter that came out, and then his comments just now. And kind of curious on some of the articles that he referenced in his letter. It talked about one particular article, Watts's article about, I think it was Tale of Two Bays or something along that line, which I don't think that one was attached to the letter, but he mentioned it, so I looked it up. And, he's linking I think the way it was actually written was, the deficit is being driven about osprey. The deficit is being driven by fish availability, with key species being menhaden. The harvest policy and rates have not allowed stocks to recover to levels required by osprey to successfully reproduce. So I just kind of wanted to get your take on that, as far as, how was that determined, and what study was he referencing that shows that it is, one, menhaden is critical and that it has not yet recovered, if we don't really know what the abundance is?
You're going to put me on the spot, right? The data that Brian has collected certainly indicates that when menhaden are a frequent part of osprey diet, their success in raising chicks to full development and any ability to lead a nest, forgive me, I'm not an avian biologist, but was certainly increased relative to those that were left naturally to forage on their own. That is, he and his team selected a handful of nests where they provisioned food, they provisioned menhaden to those nests over time, and the hatch rate and success rate was increased relative to the nests that were left alone and the birds foraged on their own. So I don't question those data. I think, he's an expert in that regard. Where I think the discussion points emerge is when you link that observation that menhaden in the diet is going down to fisheries management failures. To my knowledge, his work did not involve any fisheries data, any menhaden data, anything regarding fisheries management. I think that's something that it's a linkage that he made, and I don't think it can be validated. So we've spoken with him about that. We're trying to work on developing, collaborative ideas and better exchange. But my take is we can't answer the question if management has failed the osprey or if abundance in the bay is below levels necessary to support osprey. What I can tell you is there's a hypothesis that's largely plausible in my mind, and that is distribution of menhaden has changed over time. And so it's possible that the nests that he looked at, which were largely in Mobjack Bay, perhaps menhaden aren't in Mobjack Bay the way they were years ago. I think that's an open question too. So I think there's several possible explanations for the data that Brian has brought forward. The sole one is not, strictly speaking, failures of management or reduced abundance of menhaden. Reduced availability perhaps, but not abundance.
Yeah, I appreciate that, because that's kind of when I read the article and a couple of the other comments in Mr. Lilly's letter, that was kind of what sparked my interest in reading some of those things, was that it was pretty almost like, here's the smoking gun, the fishery is depleted because of overfishing, which I just don't know if there's any data to support that.
There's not. Yeah, there's not.
And then the other aspect of this that, and I wasn't at that meeting, looking up some of your study, but I know Brent Hunsinger's on here as well. And, we've talked previously about the catfish population and its impacts. And I know I'm working with VMRC and several other entities on some of that, as far as getting something done with the catfish population and their impacts to things such as, small juvenile striped bass and things of that sort, and crabs and everything else. But I do think that as part of your look at the menhaden, how is that population explosion on the catfish up in the rivers and even all the way over to Cape Charles now, how is that impacting the menhaden population as well? Because I think some of the studies have also shown that when they check the gut contents of some of these catfish, that they're filled full of everything they can get a hold of, to include a lot of menhaden. So I just think that might be something we really focus on as well, not just looking at, overfishing or commercial fishing entities.
Yep, certainly good points. And I'll agree with you. There's pretty much nothing that the catfish won't prey upon. So thanks for the comments. All good points. Shanna, follow up or another question?
No, just briefly to Dan's point. Dan, next week, the Ecological Reference Points Work Group is meeting to kind of get the next benchmark assessment kicked off, and blue catfish is one of the species that actually I am researching to try to collect some diet data to see if it should be up for consideration of being added very specifically to the model. So good points there, and we're definitely paying attention to that.
And Shannon, I don't know if you've reached out to Mary, but she has some diet data.
I have heard that. Thank you.
Yep. Okay. We're a little past the 5 o'clock mark, but it's been a good discussion. I appreciate everybody's contributions. Anything last before we adjourn? Anything anybody wants to bring forward? Last minute questions or comments? Not seeing any. So Shanna, you good if we close up shop?
I'm ready.
All right, well, thanks, everybody. Like I said, if something regarding the report Vince is going to submit to the General Assembly and the presentation I gave today, if something comes to mind, feel free to email me. Happy to follow up with you later on. I appreciate your taking the time to patch into the meeting, and thanks for the good discussion and good comments. With that, I will call the meeting adjourned and wish everybody a safe and enjoyable evening. Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.